So, hi, Matt Wheeler. Today is the fourth week in the month already. Here we go. So, I want to know what socks you've selected for today.
All right. The sock choice for today is, oh gosh,
Are they
I
tacos?
it's tacos, but like I
It's
can't get
Taco
it.
Friday. There
There
it
we go.
is. Yeah, wear it like a tie.
Tacos. Yeah,
Perfect for
no.
Arizona.
Oh my gosh. I don't, it's tacos are one of my favorite foods.
Uh, You can't really go wrong, and there's so many different options. So, yes,
But I
that's
but I will tell you, you and I are spoiled because I can't tell you how many times I've been visiting friends in different parts of the country and they're like, oh, let's go have some, Mexican food. And I'm like, oh, okay. And we go, and I'm like, this is terrible. Like every once in a while, somebody will be like, no, there's this Mexican family and they moved here and they have this restaurant. And I'm like, oh, that's actually really delicious. But,
yes.
Idaho Mexican food, not my favorite.
So I used to live in West Michigan, and there was a family, and like in the summertime, they would shut down. They go down to Mexico for weeks, so we were
Yeah.
without tacos, etc. But theirs was authentic, and theirs was really good. And so you are
Ah,
right; we are spoiled. I hardly ever will be willing to get Mexican food outside this area because I'm like, yeah, I know that that's going to be like. So we are spoiled, and I'm okay with that.
yeah. No, because people will ask me, they're like, oh, you want to go to Taco Bell? And I'm like, no, like it's gross compared to like, let's get some real stuff. Anyway,
Yes.
so yeah, I'm a little bit of a taco snob, I guess.
I think we just have learned an appreciation for the really good stuff. So when life is short, why would you want the not? So yeah, so I'm going with that.
Yeah, for
Okay.
sure.
So are we talking about the fourth horseman today?
Do you know what's so funny is I don't know why I'm like, oh, it would be really silly if I was like, nope, we're never gonna do that one. But no, yeah, we'll do the fourth one.
Okay.
Um,
I was gonna say, is our little team gonna be wrong? We're gonna have not enough horse. So
no. Um, okay, so the fourth horseman that Gottman discovered, and uh, like I think I've said before, he was able to pinpoint whether a marriage is going to make it in the next 7 years based on these four horsemen, and to a 91% accuracy. Like he was so
that's pretty
accurate.
amazing. Yeah.
Oh, it really is. Now, interestingly enough, I'm going to describe to you the way that he describes stonewalling, and then I'm going to give you my take on it. Because one thing that I've learned is I actually really have a big appreciation for Gottman's work, and he's done a lot of research, and he has research to back up what he's done for the most part. And so I've really appreciated it, but I will say that in my opinion, it tends to be a little bit more like black and white, like uh, and and so as I've talked on here many times, I'm more of the emotionally focused couples therapy approach, the EFT. And Gottman and Sue Johnson, who does EFT, they do a lot of collaborative work together. But I like how she seems to encompass more of the gray area. And so to kind of show you what I mean, he talks about stonewalling as being one of the four horsemen. And the way he describes it, he calls it withdrawing to avoid conflict. And this is another piece that I think is interesting that he adds in there, and convey disapproval. So if we talk about avoiding conflict, that's one thing. Conveying disapproval is like, could be, you know what? I'm going to punish you. You've treated me poorly. I'm going to stonewall you and I'm going to punish you until you realize what you've done wrong. Right. And so that's one way. And then he says distance. So withdrawing to avoid conflict, convey disapproval, distance, and separation. And most of the time, and it's really funny because I was working with a couple the other day, and I had talked about like conveying disapproval, and one of the partners was like, "Oh yeah, I do it to punish," and I was like, "Cool." good accountability. Like that is so healthy to recognize what you're doing on purpose. But I would say most people, when they're engaging in stonewalling, it's to avoid conflict. It's to basically just try and shut down the conflict so that I can feel secure and maybe we can just move on and act like nothing happened. Um, and and that really almost every time is what I see from the person stonewalling. The stonewaller tends to be, and any one of us can do it, but you've heard me talk about somebody who's a withdrawer, somebody who's like conflict avoidant tends to be the stonewaller. Um, and their whole purpose usually is I'm going to save this relationship because what I've learned is that conflict is what causes problems. Instead of realizing it's the lack of connection in our relationship that's causing a problem. And so oftentimes the stonewaller feels like they're doing everybody a service by, you know, calming the pursuer down because the pursuer is kind of irrational and crazy and over emotional. Well, the withdrawer is flooded. It doesn't take much for a withdrawer to feel very overwhelmed with emotion and feel like I don't even have words to describe or explain. I can't match you, the pursuer. I can't match you with all of your energy and all of your wordiness. I'm going to lose a fight every single time because you, as a pursuer, have the ability to be so well versed and you know how to talk about your emotions and your feelings, and you've thought about everything. And I'm sitting here just flooded and overwhelmed. That's what's happening for the withdrawer, typically when they go to the stonewalling place. And I say that because I think every negative behavior we have in a relationship is usually with the intent of doing some good, right? Even the client who said to me the other day, I do it on purpose to punish them, is essentially saying because if they could realize what they're doing wrong, we could sort this out and we'd be okay, right? Even if that's not the healthiest way of going about it, the intention there is that we can sort this out and be all right. Well, the withdrawers doing these negative behaviors, just like the pursuer is, you know, if you were to move back up in the horseman, the pursuer is often being critical. You always criticize, you're always negative, is how the withdrawer feels. Well, they're doing that. They're being critical because they're like, well, if we could work through this, we'd be okay. Well, the stonewaller's like, if I can shut this down and calm everything down and create distance from the conflict, then we'll be fine. Not realizing that they're actually creating this massive rift. So the antidote to withdrawing, right, is what he calls physiological self-soothing. Take a break. So he's not saying don't take a break, but he basically says spend that time on the break doing something soothing, doing something distracting so that I can kind of refill my bucket, get clear in my head, and then reapproach my partner and say, "Hey, can we work through that? I've taken some time to think about what you were saying. I called up my buddy and processed it with them, and now I'm ready to engage in this conflict and see if you and I can work through it together." So we want to engage in the physiological self-soothing. Sometimes the pursuer gets so scared that it's like, no, we can't take a break ever. No breaks. We've got to work through this. We've got to talk about it. Every time you withdraw, you abandon me, which is often true for them. But there is a place where, hey, it's one of the things I've said to people is like the worst advice ever is don't go to bed angry. No, sometimes go to bed, take a break, get a good night's sleep, eat a good breakfast, and then have a conversation once you've recharged. Well, that's what Gottman is suggesting. Like, take a break, recharge, eat some food. Like, if you're hungry, you're not going to have a good conversation. So then re engage in the conversation. So that's this is where I think it's really important that pursuers realize taking a break can be really healthy, but taking a break is not avoidance. Taking a break is not withdrawing permanently. It's let me get grounded and then come back and try and work through this with you. So that's kind of all I've got for right this second. Tammy, what are your thoughts?
Well, like it's hard if your pattern is I'm the pursuer, and we've tried this before where, like you walk away and I'm hoping it's a break and you never come back. I honestly have, I was thinking of a family member who like does that, not my husband, but does that, and like it would be a week of silence, and like just the complete distancing, and then all of a sudden magically everything's okay, and I'm like, it's not really okay, so I'm like, how do you set this up so so the pursuer does have the ability to go, yes, that person's going to come back, and how do you set it up for the person who's avoidant to go, you have to come back, like,
Yeah.
so thoughts on that?
Yeah, this one's hard because that physiological self-soothing is going to depend on every different person's need, right? Like I know as a withdrawer or as a pursuer, me taking a break is me going, okay, you know what? I need to calm down because I'm going to blow up all over the place right here. And so then I'm like, you know what? I'm going to take a break. Like I remember one time I got in a disagreement to put this lightly with my son, my oldest son, and like I had to leave the house and I walked for hours. At the same time, that day I reached out to Troy, and I was like processing with Troy. I'm like, I'm blowing my mind here. This is killing me. And I was able to work through it, but it took me hours of walking that day. And it was like a Sunday afternoon for me to get clear before I could come back. And I don't remember if I even reapproached the issue with my son that day. I may have come the next day and said, "Hey, can I talk to you?" So I think for every single person, it's going to be a little bit different. I think it's in that case, my son he would have appreciated if I never reapproached him on the issue at all. Right? But as a pursuer, I knew I needed enough distance so that I didn't do something or say something stupid. And honestly, in that moment, I was so incensed that I would have done something stupid. I would have physically snapped like I never have before. It's like I just knew that about where I was at. And so in that case, it's like you need to take a break for as long as you do, but especially if I were a withdrawer and my partner's a pursuer, I'm going to try and say to my partner, look, I'm not trying to abandon you. I need a break. Um, I'll come back in an hour, right? Like if I can try and give them some parameters. Now, if in an hour I come back and I say, look, I said I'd be back in an hour. Here I am. I still haven't gotten clear. I'm not ready to talk about it. I'll tell you what, I'm going to get a good night's sleep. I'm going to call one of my friends first thing in the morning. And by the time I get home from work tomorrow, we're going to talk about this, right? Like it's and if I do all of that and I get home from work and I'm still not ready, then I'm going to tell them, look, I am really sorry. I told you we'd talk about it now. Um, I have a meeting with my therapist tomorrow. Let me meet with my therapist. Then I'm going to come and revisit it with you. Like, no matter how many times you have to do that, keep your partner updated, right? Even if you come back and you're not ready to actually work through it like you thought you would be, keep your partner updated, especially if they're a pursuer and you're a withdrawer, because you're trying to prevent them from feeling that abandonment that comes up when I've so frequently just said, I'm out. We're not doing this.
Yeah, well, I can imagine as the pursuer going like, but you told me you would be, like you're like it's really hard to not go,
Right.
okay, I'm gonna pursue,
Right. Well, yeah, because, and so as a withdrawer, if you can do this, and you might need to write this down or come back and rewatch this video, but then at that point, look, I know this is disappointing. I know this has to feel really painful. I know that you're scared. I know that you feel abandoned by me, and I'm so sorry. I don't want to hit that wound. But I know that if I engage with you in this right now, when I'm not quite ready, it's going to be worse because I'm going to say or do something unhealthy. Right? This is high level skill here, but like you acknowledge your impact on your partner. And if you can acknowledge your impact and help them understand the logic of what you're trying to do, they often will calm and go, "Oh, okay, no, that's good." Like, you want to essentially soothe them by saying, "I see you. I know how hard this is."
Yeah,
So,
no, yeah, and I think that makes a ton of sense. When you were talking about, the conflict avoidant and easily flooded, like I think it's one of those things, and I'm sure you have some input on this, where um, as you grow in this, you hopefully get a little more bandwidth. So like you have almost no level of, you're easily flooded, and then it's like, okay, I can take a little bit more before I get easily flooded. Do you see that, or is it like if you're really conflict avoidant, like it's just terribly difficult to overcome?
well, the withdrawer has to build up emotional tolerance over time, but I don't think my wife would care, but like she is the withdrawer in our relationship, and her emotional bandwidth is like this compared to mine. Like I'm a water tower compared to her, compare as far as my emotional bandwidth compared to her thimble. Like, and that's
Mhm.
not being rude. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, sometimes she's the perfect person for me to be married to because she helps me stabilize. Like, I'm emotionally like, and she is able to keep me stable because of that ability that she has to not get overwhelmed and emotionally erratic like I do. So this is where it's a total gift. And so the withdrawer, though, over time has to learn to expand that thimble to, I don't know, I don't even drink, but a shot glass, right? Like a shot glass to a pint. Again, I don't, whatever. But like they need to learn over time to expand it, but they're never going to most likely have the emotional bandwidth that a pursuer appears to have. But taking those breaks does teach them to like and to expand it just a touch. Let me take a break. Let me get some self-care. I'll expand it just a little. Sorry, does
I
that
think
help?
yeah, no, it does. And I'm like you, and my husband is the emotional, I mean, he's very grounded. Thank God, because like somebody needs to, because I can woo. So yeah, so we did find, the perfect people to be the balance. But it also is, it's the contradictory style, so to speak. And, so you're not relating to each other on your same, on your same level. So, but understanding that, and I really appreciate most of the time, every now and then, if there's something going on, I want somebody to be, as vehement as I am about whatever it is I'm vehement about, so it can be a little more challenging. But I also think with the pursuer, like, we're talking about, raising it from a thimble, like we have to learn to tone down. Like I use this analogy that, I am, like it's not as bad as it was, but when the pendulum would swing, and like now the pendulum swings like this, but I had to learn to be more grounded and more balanced. And so, and I think a lot of this is, what is the goal? If the goal is to work on whatever the issue is, if the goal is to work on the relationship, you know I was talking to Dr. Eddie Caparucci on Wednesday, and he was talking about a couple in conflict, and he said, an hour and a half of brr. And I was like, oh my God, my brain would go numb. He goes, no, like that's not as bad as, the 4 hours. And I was like, I wouldn't be rested. I would just lose it, And so if the goal is that we're going to work on the relationship, if the goal is whatever this conflict point, pain point is right now, how best to do that, then both of us being as grounded and settled as we possibly can, is going to give us the best opportunity to move forward in a healthy way. I'm kind of thinking your son must be more the one that was a little, he's probably a little bit more like your wife. We're going like, yeah, well, we'll just ignore that whole situation.
No,
So,
it's funny because my daughter is my oldest daughter is more like me, where I mean, emotional bandwidth huge, and like wants to talk about everything right now, right now. And it was interesting because my son is more like my wife, where he's like, nope, we can avoid that. And so it was funny, and when we were doing parenting, there were times where my wife's like, she's yours, like I'm done, I can't do this, right? And there were times where I'm trying to do parenting with him, and she's like, you need to back off. Like, you're flooding him. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I haven't even,
I'm
we
just having
haven't
a
even,
conversation.
yeah, we're not having a conversation. I just started talking to him. Like, well, how could he be flooded? We haven't got anywhere. And so no, it's totally
But
that.
have it, yeah, but having so there you're talking about the whole family and recognizing everybody's styles, and how do you get the best success is understanding somebody's style, and like you said, it's not good or bad, it's just it's just different from how we show up, and so understanding that, then we can go,
Well,
oh, I'm going to relate to them on their level.
and that's what makes it difficult, is I think too often it's easy to create a judgment. When we're a pursuer, we think everybody should be pursuers. When we're a withdrawer, we think everybody should be withdrawers, right? We don't see it in the negative. We actually see it in the positive, which is, well, look at all the good. Like, I am a withdrawer, and I keep people from feeling uncomfortable and from feeling unnecessary pain. Like, if we can just avoid it, then I'm doing everybody a favor. And pursuers obviously think their way is the right way. And that's what's hard, is that um, it there are positives and negatives to both of them.
Yes, and the balance. I was thinking about like when kids play soccer, when they first learn soccer, and it's really bunch ball. You know exactly where the ball is because they're all right there. And I was like, well, that's everybody being a pursuer. And then there's just nothing changes and nothing gets done. You do need people who are all over the field in order to be able to
Bunch.
actually score a point.
Yeah.
So
That's really funny. No, and yeah, that's why I said earlier, like, there was a time where I would question, like, man, did I marry the right person? Right. And like years later, as I got healthier and was able to engage better, I was like, oh my gosh, I wouldn't want to be married to another pursuer. Um, I mean, I I won't even get into how
yeah.
messy that could be, if that makes sense. And I was like, wow, we really complement each other well, but we both had to learn like how to do that. And it takes a lot of effort
And willingness. So.
and willingness.
Yes. Okay, so Matt, the question is, how is stonewalling different from disengaging from abuse? Sometimes our nervous system is overwhelmed and 1 hour break is not enough. Or like if the other person wants to talk about your part in ruining the relationship while they are the one who has an addiction and cheated.
Okay, so we'll slow this down just a touch. So I I don't know how to distinguish this, but I'm not going to. I want to make sure that I have upset people before when I've said this, and so I need to make sure to distinguish. There are times when, let's say, I feel abused, okay? And so if somebody's name calling me, that's going to feel abusive, right? If somebody can raise their voice and argue with me, and that can feel abusive. And I'm not here to basically distinguish what's abuse and what's not. So, but let's stop there. If I'm feeling like I'm in an abusive situation, then I obviously I'm going to flood or feel overwhelmed or feel pain And so I am going to disengage from that situation. But stonewalling, I think, is the concept that we never return to the issue, that we avoid and don't address it. And so if I say to my partner, like, this feels abusive, I can't do this, we have to have this conversation in front of our couples therapist, which people do that pretty regularly. I if and I love that you brought this up because I almost forgot. I had a conflict with another therapist in my office the other day, and that conflict probably lasted several weeks, but it wasn't pressing. But in the middle of that conflict, I was engaging and connecting in other situations, like, meaning that therapist didn't even know that I had a conflict, but I was taking the time to process through it, figure out, what am I seeing this correctly? Am I being empathetic and compassionate for them? Like, you know, before I took the time to address that specific conflict, I was not stonewalling the therapist, the other person, right? But what I was doing was, I'm not going to engage in this conversation because I'm not clear enough to do it yet. But then any other opportunity to connect that came up, I connected, and we worked together on cases and situations or whatever, and it was fine. I could have gone to lunch with them and had a very engaging time, and it would have been fine. So in that situation, I was holding off the conflict that needed to be worked through until I got clear enough that I felt like I could engage healthily and have a productive conversation. Stonewalling typically is, we're not going to connect in any way. Like, I'm going to show you that I'm unhappy and I'm going to take my distance. And they might be like, hey, do you want to take the dog for a walk? And I'm like, no. Okay. Hey, I was thinking about going and grabbing some tacos. You want to come with me? No. Well, are you hungry? Yes. Like, it's this, no matter what, we're not engaging, we're not connecting. And so disengaging from abuse or specific content that isn't working for us while we work through it, that's not stonewalling, right? That's the better term would probably be bracketing. Here's what I can handle. I'm willing to engage with this. This I don't think is productive. Let's wait until we get in front of our therapist. Let's this over here, I need to talk to some friends and get clear on it before I have a conversation, but let's connect in these other areas. And so, but I think disengaging from something that feels like abuse, or I hate saying even that way, that feels like abuse. Something, disengaging from something that's abusive, is important, just because I can't regulate if I'm being abused. And so I'm going to need to disengage so that I can regulate and then re-engage in a safe way. If it's not safe to re-engage, and so I'm not going to be at home because I'm afraid I'm going to get hit, then I'm not going back home, if that makes sense. So hopefully this helps a little bit. The other piece you put in here, because you're right, in those situations, a 1 hour break isn't enough. But the other piece you said, or like, if the other person wants to talk about your part in ruining the relationship. This one gets tricky, because I might say to the person, look, well, there's a couple of things I'm going to try to do. One, I'm going to try to understand, what are they trying to say to me? They want to understand if I can recognize the mistakes that I made along the way, even if it gives them zero excuse to have done what they did. Okay. So let's say, try to give you an example, and it's funny because a very personal one comes up. I remember when I was growing up, I used to hear my father say, I wouldn't have done what I did if your mother had been more loving. And I remember being like, you dirtbag. Like,
Mm-hmm.
now, if he had said, I realized over the years that I took a less than loving relationship and I made horrible choices that nobody should make. right? Then it would be like, oh, okay, well, why did you take something that wasn't loving enough for you and go the direction you went, right? Like, we all have room to see how we impacted our partner. And he or she, your partner in this situation, might be saying, can we talk about your impact, even if I'm not blaming you, even if I just want some recognition that we were both struggling with different things, right? That's my gracious assumption in this moment for what your partner might be trying to do. Do I love the let's talk about your part in ruining the relationship? No, I don't love it. I don't feel like that's worded very well. If the intent in that experience is for them to create blame, that's not helpful. If our intent in that experience is to say, look, I want to know that you and I both are wanting to make changes to figure out how to have a better relationship. Can we talk about that? Sure. Let's have a conversation about that. Maybe, or if I'm ready and if I can. Um, but no, nothing, any behavior that is your part will never justify their behavior. It will never justify their addiction. It will never justify cheating. Um, but there is a point in a healthy relationship where we can talk about it, but sometimes that's not going to even happen until we sit down in front of our couples therapist. So I don't know if that answers the question. It's a little bit of a dicey place for me to go. It could stir up a lot of emotions if you're hearing me, if you think that I'm blaming or whatever. So
No, I don't hear blame. And I really appreciated that you shared the example of like this is one of those where we need to take it to our couples therapist and have a conversation, and I think even with the second part of this one, take this to your couples therapist, if you're there. Now, I read this you were the more gracious version. I was like, I feel like this is blame shifting from an addict, like, and I was like, I think as a partner I'd be going, nothing I did or didn't do caused you to act out. I'm willing to take ownership of things I can learn and improve on in a relationship, but I know for sure that there is nothing that I did or didn't do that caused you to act out. Your addiction caused that, and here we are. I go
right,
back to what we were talking about though with the goal, like what is the goal of the relationship? And you were talking about that too. And if the goal is to heal the relationship, yeah, then we can be, looking at all of that. But if it's like you were saying, with your personal example of like, because of this, that's why I did all this. No, that's just justification and not taking responsibility for the pain I've caused in my addiction to you and to our relationship.
yeah, and I'll tell you, I remember, I don't know that there were times where I would hear my father like take accountability, but then I'd hear that at other times, and I'd be like, I can't, I can't truly believe that you understand ownership and impact, like, because it just sounds so much like blame shifting. Now, at the same time, I do think that if he were able to have been vulnerable and say, I can see what led up to me making all of these choices. There's no excuse for it, but it is helpful to understand how I got to this point. Great, let's have a conversation. I don't know that he was ever capable or willing, but I do think it's important for us to have those conversations, especially in front of a couples therapist, to say, I'm willing to talk about the mistakes I've made, but I need to know that if I talk about it, you're not using it as an excuse or justification, right? And I've found so many people don't mean to make it sound that way. And I have to teach them, then you're probably going to need to approach it this way, right? Like you're probably going to need to say, look, I'm trying to share with you how bad that hurt. And here's the hard part. In this case, you talk the person who posted talks about they had their addiction and they cheated. I think it's helpful for them to say, to basically own, yes, I can see what I ended up doing, but it's helpful for me to understand how my brain allowed me to get here, and you had a hand in that. But like, even you having a hand in that doesn't mean you meant to, right? So like that, but so often we're just not healthy enough to have that conversation on our own, because it just sounds so much like we're telling the partner it's your fault, when any of us learning to be accountable has to be able to say, the only person, like the buck stops here, right? The only person that is responsible for what I did is me. And I was so twisted and demented in my thought process. This is where I went. But can you see what helped get me there? And then that's where empathy and compassion comes in. Oh my gosh, I had no idea that I was impacting you that much, or that you had needs that were coming up and I wasn't showing up for you. Yeah, and usually that's a breath of fresh air to be like, "Oh my gosh, like, this is the point I was actually trying to get to, and I lost it for a second. The person who has the addiction and who cheated has valid hurt that needs to be addressed. They deserve to have their hurt addressed. The problem is, and I'm going to say this as kindly as possible, they are so unhealthy, they don't know how to ask for their hurt to get addressed, right? They don't know how to say, I have valid hurt. Even if you didn't mean to hurt me, partner, I have valid hurt, and I just want to talk about my hurt too. But so often they've not exercised enough accountability that the partner who's been betrayed can say, I can hear your hurt. I feel like my hurt has been sufficiently heard. And so it's like, it's this weird space where if I go in too early as a therapist and I say, hey, betrayed partner, you need to hear their hurt, the betrayed partner's like, forget you.
Mhm.
I'm never coming back here. But the reality of it is their hurt is just is I have to be careful again, because I realize the way I'm saying it, they have just as much validity to have their pain addressed. But I can totally see as a betrayed partner why their betrayal is so much bigger. Because in that sense, it's like, what did I do to hurt you? And you did this to hurt me. It feels disproportionate. And I mean, it is, but it still doesn't invalidate the hurt of the person with addiction.
So I'm going to ask you to take it one layer deeper. So so I'm telling you that I was hurt because you abandoned whatever. But if I'm the betrayed partner and I'm going like, but you were not safe, you were not trustworthy, so therefore I had to pull away, and I can maybe recognize that it felt like abandonment to me, to you, but your behaviors were creating that. So it almost can be this really complicated layer. Again, I go back to what is the goal, and if the goal is healing. With this one, it feels like, and I'm making it up, but I want to blame shift and whatever, and shame. I mean, it's always, shame and fear and everything else, but I mean, because I keep thinking, well, like if you start unpacking, it's like I felt abandoned, but I was like, I needed to create safety for myself. So yeah, I stepped away and I pulled away, and yes, I could understand how that looks like abandonment to you, but I'm just like taking care of me because you are not safe. So, like, thoughts.
Well, if I'm hearing you, you're saying that if the betrayed partner, when they pull away because they feel blame shifted and
Well, so like with your example, you go like, are you able to hear me? And I felt abandoned because you did X, Y, and Z. But now the partner is going like one more layer down, going like, yeah, but I
oh,
hear what you're saying, that I was doing X, Y, and Z, but your behaviors created, you know what I mean? So it's like we start here, go here, like, you
yeah.
know what I mean?
And I mean, okay, ideally, if we were to work it all the way back, right? And I don't even know that this is necessary or entirely possible, but
I
like
would not think so. Yeah.
if we were to work it all the way back, we could say, look, can I walk through? So you and I get into this relationship. You're unaware that I've got some coping mechanisms. I was unwilling to share them. I was scared you would abandon me or uh, you know, break up with me or divorce me. And so I hid those deep down inside. That wasn't fair. Um, but if you'll give me room, I'd like to walk through like which behaviors really started causing me to bury this even more. But again, it's like, how do we have that conversation where you, as the betrayed partner, never hear and therefore it's your fault? Because for too often, that's like, what do I need to do to take the shame off of me? Who can I blame? Right. So, a really healthy individual in recovery is able to go, look, I'm not blaming you in the slightest, but I would like the opportunity to like walk through our history and I can show you whether you intended to or not where I was getting hurt. And maybe you can help me understand where you were getting hurt along those ways too. So we get to this space where we can both hear each other's hurt without hearing blaming or um, justification or whatever. It's like now we're just recounting the narrative. Oh, well, here's what was happening for me. Oh, and that's what was happening for you. No wonder, because when you did that, then I went here. Now we're just like almost putting the puzzle together. But so when a betrayed partner, if they go to, well, I wouldn't have pulled away if you hadn't have betrayed me to begin with. Yeah, sure, that's true. And at the same time, but if we don't figure out how to talk about this, I don't know how far we're going to get.
No, I love that you're saying like, oh yeah, that like that makes sense that, that was happening for you, and here's what was happening for me. Like then I'm recounting, but I'm not. Well, you did this, and
Right.
therefore and yeah, it's not you caused this, so therefore I did this. It's like yeah, now we're sharing. Wow, and on what an emotionally connected level. If I'm willing to be that vulnerable, and you're willing to be that vulnerable, we aren't going to do it perfectly, but wow, we could really have some insights about, ourselves and each other.
And consider this like what we're talking about here is like emotional kung fu, emotional kung fu, black belt level. I mean, this is like it takes a lot of skill to get to this point, but it's some of the most beautiful skill you can learn because then we really start understanding and connecting with each other. I have couples with far less betrayal than addiction or maybe even no betrayal. They just don't know how to do connection and they don't know how to have these conversations, right? So maybe my sample size is skewed because the people who come to therapy need help, but like in my estimation, most humans don't know how to do this. They don't know how to sit down and have a conversation and not take personal what the other person is saying, right? Like it's a skill I've certainly had to practice. I've had people in my office get super pissed at me because they're like, well, I can't believe you're saying that. You're saying he has an excuse. And I'm like, whoa. Yeah, I'd be pissed too if I thought my therapist was telling me he had an excuse. Most people don't even have that skill set, right? Like I practice this constantly to not take it personal. And the hardest person for me to do this with, that took me years and years and years of concerted effort, was my wife, my spouse, my partner, right? And so for couples to learn to do this and it be on the level of like pain that most typical couples watching this are going to have gone through, gosh, you guys have years of practicing this. And if I were to say that probably the number one skill in learning this is learning not to react reactively, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's literally learning to pause, and instead of withdrawing, just pausing and going, let me think about that. Let me notice how that makes me feel. Let me see how I want to react. Let me see what reaction would be most helpful for right now. What is the gracious assumption that is happening here as you say all this that kind of hurts, right? Like, but like all of that, we have to learn how to do. We aren't taught this. Our parents didn't teach us this. If they did, you're not watching this webinar. Like, and the truth is, I've taught my kids really well as best I can, and they still struggle with this with their intimate partners. I watch it, and they'll come to me, and then I'm like, well, let's see if we can slow you down, see what's going on here. This is such a learned skill set, learning to slow down and not react until we know what we're reacting to.
So you're talking about your kids, and I'm going like, well, I mean, you're doing a great job of teaching them and they get to practice at home. But just think about their partners probably haven't had this modeled. So they're at a very different level. So like it's kind of it's just different.
Yeah, but here's the funny part. When I watch my kids, right, the two older ones who are
Hmm.
in relationships, when I watch them, they aren't even practicing what I taught them to practice, right? Like, so my point in saying that was, even if you have a parent teaching you how to do this, it's the equivalent of them watching me and trying to teach them. But until you get into an intimate
Hmm.
relationship where all of the sensitivities are there, and besides that, they got a lot of poor practice with their friends growing up, right? Because that's just society around us. They aren't good at it either. And so it's funny because I watch my kids and I don't even say, oh, they're good. It's their partner. No, I can see where my kids are blowing it as much as their partners are. Like, if that makes any
Yeah.
sense.
No, it does. Yeah, and I hadn't thought about that, from the standpoint. But like you said, the hardest place to integrate this is with your wife. Therefore, them, if the relationships are different than friendships and kids on the playground. So I could see why, oh, I have to, like, this is a whole different level of learning to do this and practice it. So
It
hmm.
is a whole different level. And the truth is that any one of us can kind of quit and go, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. And we can end the relationship. And hear me out. I don't think every relationship is worth saving. I really don't. There's plenty of them I've been in where I'm trying to help people, but I'm not the type of therapist that will ever tell somebody, I think you should end your relationship. Like that's way above my pay grade, because you're the one that has to live with the results of that, right? So I think a healthy therapist knows to stay out of that and let the person figure it out, or the couple figure it out. But ultimately, like, all of us have to learn how to do this skill set. So I have to learn to do it with my kids, because they do come to me and say, you know what, dad, you were a good dad. You're a great dad, but you screwed up here. And I have to go, oh, well, tell me more. And then they explain it. And I go, I don't, in my head, sometimes I'm like, man, I don't agree with you, but I don't say that. I go, man, I had no idea that you saw it that way. I had no idea that I impacted you that way. I'm so glad you told me. What else do you need to share? I'm now just creating space that they can get all that stuff out. So even if I don't learn to apply this with my partner, every relationship I have to learn to apply this. This is intimacy at its finest. I can hear your hurt and pain that I potentially caused, whether I meant to or not. And if I, whether I screwed up or not, or meant to hurt you by screwing up or not, I have to learn to sit in this place of your pain and not take it personal. You have to learn to sit in the space of my pain, even if I'm the one that injured you, and not take it personal. It's, this is like, I mean, this is the bedrock of where foundations start to really become amazing.
Well, and I love in that example, he said, even if I don't agree with you, and you never said, oh, I'm sorry I did that. Like you didn't take ownership of something that you didn't, but you were in there going like,
I
I
am,
acknowledge all of this
I
for
am,
you.
I am big on not taking ownership of something I don't agree with. And I think too many addicts will take ownership of stuff that isn't true because they just want to calm their partner down. They don't realize you're causing a bigger problem because now you're taking ownership for something that short term will calm your partner down, but long term, they're going to wonder if any of your recovery is healthy and real, because later when it's time to actually work through that thing, you're going to be like, well, I know I apologize, but I didn't, I don't actually agree with it. Like I didn't do that thing. And then they're like, well, now how can I trust any apology you've ever made? So no, I won't apologize to anybody if I don't understand. I won't take accountability, especially if I don't understand what I'm taking accountability for and that I can agree to that in the future. Right. I've injured my kids, and there's been times where they said, where I've had to say, you know what, I did do that. And that wasn't okay of me. And I have to take ownership. There's other times, Dad, you did this. And I have to say, oh my gosh, I had no idea I did that. And they might be like, well, what were you thinking? Well, to be honest, I'm not sure. They're like, I have to be able to approach it to say, I honor that you were hurt. I don't remember ever doing that, but it doesn't matter because you were hurt. So how do I show up now? And how do I work on never doing that again? And if they press me, well, Dad, did you do this? Like, no, I don't have a recollection of doing it. But I remember, and this is like really shaky ground, because if I can't own the behavior that I did this thing, apologizing isn't going to make it easier. I remember approaching the person who sexually abused me, and I don't recommend this, by the way, but I was in grad school and I had seen enough recovery in this person's life that I felt like I could approach them because it had never been acknowledged, and
Mm.
I took a risk, and I seriously don't know that I would recommend this to most people ever, but I took a risk and I said, hey, would you be willing to sit down and talk about some stuff in the past? They graciously said sure. I disclosed, hey, I think there, I remember abuse, and their response was so powerful, because the response was, I don't remember ever doing that, but I know I was so unhealthy that I probably did. And what they were saying was, I really don't have a recollection, and I did so many messed up things that, not to diminish you, but I can't honestly say I did it, but it probably did. And like I remember thinking that was like the most amazing response, because at the time they were a kid themselves. Like there was like a 10-year age gap, but like they were still a kid themselves, if that makes sense. And like it was like the coolest response ever, because they weren't lying and taking accountability to make me feel better. Again, that's crap accountability. You don't ever want to do that. But they weren't saying it was outside the realm of possibility. Like I loved that they were like, nah, like I was messed up. I did a lot of stupid, unhealthy things. And so it probably happened. If you remember it, I want to I want to apologize. And like the way they led into it was so powerful, to be like, I apologize because it probably happened, but I can't own for sure. Right. And I was like, that's amazing. That's as much as they could do. And that's what I needed.
Yeah.
I hope that's like clicking for people.
Yeah, no, that, yeah. And, thank you for, sharing the vulnerability, and like, I just think about like, he or she was a very broken person. And, like for them to be able to take ownership, even without the recollection. But like you said too, I have lots of addicts who are like, I'm going to say I did it just because she won't believe anything else. And I was like, in recovery, we take responsibility for what we did, but we
I
don't lie and say what we didn't do.
I have seen people take responsibility for affairs they never had in an attempt to try and calm their spouse down, and it is the worst. It's awful. Don't ever do that. Right? It would be better for you to keep them being upset and be honest about what you can recollect. Right? You can say, look, my recollection, this never happened. I don't want to take ownership for something that I don't believe happened, but I understand why you would be terrified that I did these things. I understand why all the clues you've put together would add up to this. And as upset as you're going to be, I can't own it if I don't remember it.
Well, and
Like,
even with multiple occasions, it ends up being I took responsibility, and now she thinks there's more. Well, of course, like you've just opened the door up to, like,
yes.
if I knew it, and now there's a whole bunch more, and so then it's the never ending, and I keep harping on this, but it's like, what is the goal? If the goal is that I'm going to find out every gory detail and what, like, or is it, gosh, I as a partner need healing, I'm using he and she, but as an addict need healing, and we want to move together or apart, but we want to move forward in a different way, in a healthy way. If we keep the goal in mind, then we don't get so stuck in the mire of in the moment.
Yep. Yeah. And that's the tough part. What is our goal? If our goal is not to try and get closer to our partner, what are we doing? What questions are we asking? Why are we doing this? Right? So we have to slow down and figure out, what is the outcome I'm looking for here? And is this the right direction to go? And that's why most of the time, when somebody's talking to me about an injury that I may have caused, I'm just sitting and listening and thinking and just slowing down my breathing, my body responses. The last thing I want to do is react, because I don't know what I'm reacting to. And that just takes so much effort. But that's not stonewalling. That's literally just, you know what? I'm taking this in. I'm thinking about this, just wanting to make sure I fully hear you before I respond. I want to make sure you feel heard before I respond. Wonderful skill to learn, which would be the opposite of stonewalling.
Yeah, yeah. We are out of time. Thank you. This was a great topic. I'm so glad you brought the Fourth Horseman out, because like we would be without the whole team. So thanks everybody. We'll see you. I have to think if next week is March 1st. So yes. So Debbie
Yeah.
will be here. I had to think if we had a fifth Friday, but no, not Friday. But so next week will be Debbie will be back with us. So thanks, Matt. See you in a few weeks.
All right.
Bye,
See you guys.
everyone.